What are we going to talk about today, buddy? Oh, there we go.
Well, good morning. Good morning to everybody who joined us in Clubhouse just a couple of minutes ago, and to everybody who is watching us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook as well. It's a pleasure to have you with us and to have Timothy with us again, because there was a question whether he could keep on board or not today. Thankfully, he is there, and hopefully he will stay there, not falling off board. So, Timothy, good morning, and
Good morning,
thank
Maya.
joining us again from somewhere in the Indo-Pacific, let me say. Right, so this is the 167th episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One, which is held by Japan Expert Insights with Timothy Langley, the CEO of Langley Esquire, a consultancy firm in downtown Tokyo. So, Timothy, I'm not going to keep anybody waiting any longer because we have a lot of things to talk about. I have a lot of questions to you. So keep on board, brace yourself. And to everybody who is watching us, prepare your comments and questions so that we can talk with you once Timothy is done with the briefing. So the floor is yours. Or maybe the water, or I don't know, the board or whatever.
The deck is mine.
The deck is yours. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Maya. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 167th episode, consistently, consecutively. That's more than 3 years together. Thank you very much for joining us every Sunday at 8:20 to find out what's going on in Japanese politics that's important to you. I really appreciate it. Last week, we got cut off prematurely. You know, we were talking in the Q&A period about Bunshun and the impact and the weight and the power of Bunshun, even though it's a weekly magazine. Some people hold it in disdain, but it has an impact in Japanese politics. And then before the Q&A could start, my feed died, my bandwidth died, and I think maybe Bunshun has more power than we give it credit for, but I apologize for that.
Somebody may have been listening to you, and not being very happy with you talking about it.
Well,
So,
well, we know that there is really nobody else in the world that talks about Japanese politics in English. So I appreciate this opportunity. I appreciate Maya, forcing me to do this every goddamn Sunday morning at 8:20. But it is something that's become, a looked forward to feature of my daily life. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
well, you're very welcome, and I am not going to apologize for having you up and awake, yes, every Sunday at 8:20. So I'm just going to say thank you. Again, the
Okay.
deck is...
Okay, so I need to just prepare everybody. Today I am anchored in a small port, a small harbor called Aburatsubo. Tokyo Bay is it's surrounded by the Chiba Peninsula and the Miura Peninsula, where Yokohama sits. And then there is Sagami Bay, which is on the Yokohama side that goes all the way to Shimoda. And it's this huge bay on the other side of the Yokohama Peninsula. And this Sagami Bay is so deep that you could take Mount Fuji, turn it upside down, and it would never even break the water. It is so deep. It's got special fish and sharks that they haven't even discovered yet that live there. But this small harbor that I'm in now faces Sagami Bay. So typically when I'm broadcasting, it's usually on the Tokyo Bay side. But the reason why I'm giving you this, excuse me, this background is because as we enter Golden Week, there's 2 Sundays that fall within Golden Week. And I'm a bit worried about broadcasting from the deck of, I don't know where I will be. Depends on where the wind takes us. But last week we lost a little bit of connectivity, and I apologize about that. I'm striving hard not to do that. But 167 is pretty significant. We're going to do this every week as long as you guys tolerate it and continue to support us and express an interest in what's going on in Japanese politics. So moving right along, it's a busy week. It's been a busy week for the Prime Minister. This week that's coming up is also busy. It makes sense to me. I mean, it's kind of like the time of life when people should be interested in Japanese politics. And when we first started this 3 years ago, Maya, we were concerned that maybe there's not enough to talk about on a weekly basis, maybe monthly, but you insisted, let's do it every week, do it every Sunday and see what happens. And
And
it
then
just,
I forced you doing that. That's we already heard that part.
yes, yeah, okay, thank you. Um, So what we have found out, it's just there's so much going on in Japanese politics that is important. It's consequential. It's it, it's important not only within the country here and what's going on with the yen and the economy, but also geopolitically what's going on with North Korea. And there's stuff to talk about today on all those issues. So I don't want to go on too long about the background of that, but um, we are gearing up for Golden Week, and I need to make sure that you are apprised of that. Kishida will be in Paris during Golden Week, and then move on to Brazil and Paraguay. So it's somewhat unusual for the Prime Minister to travel to do that. That's on the other side of the hemisphere, and it's in the southern Americas. Paraguay and Brazil are important trade partners to Japan. All of the ethanol that Japan uses for its airplanes and for the cars comes from Brazil. Paraguay, there's a lot of meat and vegetables that come from Paraguay. So it's an important state visit for the Prime Minister. He will be meeting with the president of both of those countries and be back at the end of Golden Week. I think Taro Aso, who is probably the number 2 most powerful person in Japan these days. Some people would say he's the number 1 most powerful person, given the popularity of the current prime minister. So Taro Aso, you might remember we reported on this maybe 5 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. Taro Aso left with a very small delegation. One of his lieutenants went to Washington, D.C., met some people, and then tried to get an audience with former President Trump. He was unsuccessful there. And then the state visit came. This was, last week. The president or the prime minister came back last week in time to catch this show last week. The Taro Aso is on once again a mission. Tomorrow he departs to try and meet with former President Trump. So there's a lot going on different levels. You've got the prime minister visiting with Joe Biden and cutting deals. More than 40 agreements were signed when they were in Washington, D.C. We reported this on the synopsis, and thank you very much for commenting positively on that synopsis coming out. But there's a lot going on there. The Secretary of Defense, Mr. Kihara, is going to Hawaii. He's going to spend his Golden Week in Hawaii. I know how unpleasant that must be. But Hawaii is just, if you're living in downtown Tokyo, you can't miss the influx of foreigners that are coming in, tourists all over the place. Hawaii has that in spades during Golden Week, and it is flooded with the Japanese. So I think it's probably not a very good time to hold a summit or a trilateral in Hawaii, but that's what he's going to do. Probably not take his family with him, because the ire that generates from the population is just so tough. And then during Golden Week, I also will be traveling to parts unknown, but I will continue to report to you. Maya and I will continue to hold this show together. So there's a lot going on. I think the thing that we need to talk about, first of all, is the by-election. So the prime minister came back from his trip. This trip was very successful, got lots of high marks, got a lot of stuff done, and the fallout, not the negative connotation to fallout, but the follow-up with regard to that is really at a fever's pitch. You've got trilateral and 2-on-2 meetings that are coming as a consequence of that. He spent 15 minutes talking with President Yoon as soon as he came back. I think this phone call was on Wednesday. Mr. Yoon, as you might know, had elections in South Korea on the same day that Mr. Biden and Mr. Kishida met in Washington, D.C. And this election kind of flipped Mr. Yoon's party. He is now qualified as a lame duck. In the next 2 years, there won't be another election. And as president, he doesn't have the numbers to push through the policies. This is bad news for Japan. It's bad news for the United States, because as a consequence of Mr. Yoon being president of South Korea, the previous president was not favorable to the United States and very much anti-Japanese, and that has a huge spillover effect, especially given the geopolitics going on in North Korea. I've got more to report on that, but the end result is that as much energy and intuition or intention that was invested. Can you turn your mic off, Maya? I can hear you strangling your cat. Thank you. As much intention as there was by the United States and Japan to build this bond with like-minded countries, and Korea is obviously very important in that, they were making great progress, and now it looks like maybe this progress will go a little bit backwards. There's still lingering issues with the colonial and the pre-war period, and the reparations for people who were marginalized by the Japanese occupation of the Korean Peninsula. So that issue still lingers, unfortunately, and it prevents other more robust relations from beginning. But the by-elections confronted the prime minister 3 days after he came back from Washington, D.C. And the by-elections, as everybody knows, there are 3 seats that became available, 2 of them because the holder of these lower house seats in the parliament were forced to give up their seat because of money problems. Money problems means they were either participating in bribery or they were doing funny things with political funds. So 2 of them in Nagasaki and in Tokyo, they left their seat, and within 6 months they need to be filled again, and that 6 months culminates on the 28th of this month. So we're in the election cycle now. The third election seat is Shimane, and that's the hot button issue that is really dominating the airwaves. Shimane is the election seat of Mr. Hosoda, who was the head of the Abe faction throughout the entire time that Mr. Abe was prime minister. And he became Speaker of the House when Mr. Suga became prime minister. He was Speaker of the House, very powerful position, and he died in office about 6 months ago. So his seat needs to be filled too. The LDP has been in this district. Mr. Hosoda is 11 terms as the representative from Shimane. You would think that the LDP would have a lock on this, and as it turns out, the LDP is really teetering in Shimane. The LDP has, I don't know how to put it, there's so much distrust directed at the LDP that they are not even running a candidate in Nagasaki or in Tokyo. If you can believe that, that's just almost outrageous. That in those 2 districts, they've basically said, even if we run a candidate as good and as cool as he might be, he's not going to win. So they've already conceded that. So all bets are on Shimane. Shimane is very interesting. It's the only place in Tokyo they've got 8 contenders for the seat. In Nagasaki, the Constitutional Democratic Party is lining up against Ishin. So in watching this or watching the election results next week, the pundits will come out and they'll say Ishin's policy was this, and the Constitutional Democratic Party was this. So it'll be crystallized. It'll be crystallized throughout this week of campaigning. You'll be able to see that. But the LDP is ignoring that. That's a fight between Constitutional Democratic Party and Ishin. They're also having the same kind of fight in Tokyo. But with Shimane, it is just the LDP versus the Constitutional Democratic Party who is supporting the other candidate. The interesting thing, there's so many interesting things about Shimane, but the whole point here is if the prime minister loses all 3 seats, I mean, I think the general appreciation for this prime minister and his cabinet is just going to go into the toilet. If he can't win any of these seats, it really paints a picture that the LDP is in complete disarray and is disintegrating. It is disintegrating in a certain way. Mr. Motegi's faction, this week, they decided to disband their faction. So there's only one faction left in Japanese politics right now. That's Mr. Taro Aso's faction. Whether he continues to, I think he'll just continue in the same manner. It is a policy-oriented, it is an organization that can generate and distribute political funds. None of the other factions exist to do that. They are all policy-oriented groupings. And I think, I mean, even before Mr. Kishida's term ends, you can say with high certainty that he has done more to change the LDP since the LDP's foundation in the pre-war period. The amount of changes that have gone on, people in the audience now who have honed their skills on understanding Japanese politics, it's all based on the faction system. The LDP, in order to understand the LDP, you have to understand the factions and how they work and who's in the leadership and who was in the leadership and who is potentially going to be in the leadership and how many cabinet posts they got versus the other faction. And this has been the whole description of how you understand and predict Japanese politics. That's all gone now. And we are entering into a new era. It's beyond a new era that Biden and Kishida were talking about. They were talking more about a new era of the bilateral relationship. But this thing that's going on in Tokyo right now is really enormous, and it's really important to be watching that to see how this kind of shakes out. So the race in Shimane is a hot button issue. The two candidates are a candidate she is the daughter of one of a very famous politician who got into a bit of a scrap with Koizumi. When Mr. Koizumi was prime minister, he wanted to change the postal service into a private entity, not a government entity. And this candidate was opposing it. Miss Kame, Mr. Kame, her dad, was opposing that. He left the LDP, formed his own party, and she is the daughter that survives him. So not only does she have a bone to pick with the LDP, but there's a legacy and a history there. She's running against a Japanese, the word is bureaucrat, excuse me. It sounds pejorative, but it's more descriptive. He worked in the Ministry of Finance, so he's not quite a stick in the mud, but he doesn't compare to her. She's a female. She's run an election. She's actually held a seat in the parliament. She's been defeated once or twice in her bid to succeed her father. She was successful in one term. So she's seasoned, and when you see her on television, when you see her on the campaign trucks talking, she exudes confidence and grasp of the issues. The other person, Mr. Nishikori, this is his first try, and he's being supported lavishly by the LDP. They don't want to lose this one. The prime minister went down there. The prime minister is there this week. Mr. Izumi from the Constitutional Democratic Party is there this week. I'm sorry, today too. So a lot of the news will be coming out today to compare and contrast the two leaders, how they are supporting their candidates. So a lot is going on there, and it will dictate a lot that's going to happen to the prime minister. If the LDP loses all three seats, and it looks like he might, it becomes a kind of an obvious fact. What do we do with this guy? We can't even win the elections that we should have won. Let's have a new cabinet. Let's have a new leader. His term of office ends, as you know, at the end of September, and the next best contender there is Mr. Motegi, who just dissolved his faction. He's the Secretary General, probably third in line, maybe fourth, powerful politician as the Secretary General. He doesn't get along with the Prime Minister, and it is possible that losing in Shimane, the Prime Minister could say, I'm the Prime Minister and I'm going to clean house, and it's a Secretary General who should have, really bolstered this election. We should have won it, so I'm going to ask him to resign. Alternatively, under traditional LDP politics, if you are in the cabinet, if you are in the inner circle of the prime minister, you cannot challenge the prime minister. You don't go in front of the boss and say, you don't say derogatory things. And in fact, you're not restricted. you should be reluctant to say, I'm interested in becoming prime minister. It's just, it's not cool. It's undiplomatic. It's unpolitic. You would never do that. Kono Taro did that at one point, maybe 2 years ago, said, yes, I would run if the opportunity came up. Even something as innocuous as that sort of statement generated a lot of controversy. So you have to be very careful. But you see Mr. Motegi taking more charge after the scandal has, the scandal is not over, the kickback scandal, but according to Mr. Kishida, it's over. All the decisions have been made, the punishments have been met out. Let's move forward. But still, the opposition party, they didn't waste any time. As soon as the prime minister came back from Washington, D.C., in the plenary session, they were criticizing him about the military agreements that he signed and the coziness with the United States and the command and controls center that's going to be established in Tokyo to oversee what's going on throughout this region. And that means that Japanese soldiers will be under the command of the Japanese, and hell no. So he got a lot of that. He also got criticized for making this comment, thank you very much. Boy, I wish I got an applause like this back home in the Japanese parliament. So he's criticized for that. What the hell do you mean by that? Why are you, being derogatory to us, your colleagues? So it was a joke, right? But the knives are out for the prime minister. He knows that. He must do well in Shimane. And if he doesn't, for those of you who are really tuned in, you know that Dan Harada and I had a specific program maybe a week ago about what's going to happen with Mr. Kishida. Do or die. Is he going to close down the House and make all of the lower house seats go for an election? Or is he going to suffer the consequences of a 3-seat loss, which will be decided this time next week? So the election is on the Sunday. We'll report on it, but it'll be too early. The polls will open at around the time that we start our briefing, actually. So Dan Harada and I are considering having another briefing the week after the election to talk about what the opportunities are, what's going to happen now. And I suspect people will talk a lot about who is the next contender for prime minister. People mention the same people over and over. They mention Kono Taro. They mention a couple of the female candidates who have been running in previous elections. But I think Mr. Motegi as Secretary General is the most obvious choice. It's always, as having been Secretary General, you're probably polished enough to be the next prime minister candidate. And I think this is what he's going to be working on. So does the prime minister, execute him and kick him out and put in a new Secretary General? Or does he let him stay there and kind of be in a more powerful position to fight with him come September? As Secretary General, one of the roles and responsibilities is to dictate and decide the rules for the election of the prime minister, of the president of the LDP. And so keeping Mr. Motegi in that position probably is a dangerous thing for the prime minister to do. Plus, as Secretary General, if you're following this program, you know how much power and authority he has and his ability to collect funds to distribute to other LDP members or potential LDP members, and plus just the opportunity to manage and control things as the top dog within the LDP. Obviously reporting to the prime minister, but it gives him a lot of power to do favors for people and secure his own position. So I think there's going to be a real catfight if the prime minister decides to repeat himself and be president of the LDP. I've got to imagine he's going to. It's worth the gamble. Whether he calls down the House or lets this election run its course, there is a possibility that he could close down the House and call elections when the timing is right in this election, but that would probably be before Friday of next week. Anyway, there's much more going on there. This is also a tough fight for Mr. Izumi, who is the president of the Constitutional Democratic Party. He's only been in office for about 2.5 years, 3 years, and he hasn't been very successful as a leader. There was a by-election for open seats recently. He wasn't successful in winning those. 3 lower house seats open for a by-election. The Constitutional Democratic Party lost, and 2 upper house seats. So during his tenure, there's 6 seats that were lost in a contention with the LDP. So people are wondering if Mr. Izumi has got the goods to be an effective leader. So, if the Constitutional Democratic Party does well, Mr. Izumi's star rises. If it doesn't, if he loses perhaps in Shimane, then maybe there will be other contenders for his party position. It's too early to tell, but pollsters are now saying that it's kind of up for grabs, but it looks like the Constitutional Democratic Party might win all 3 races, and that would be a huge boost for Mr. Izumi. Many other people are thinking that the division will be between the Constitutional Democratic Party and Ishin might get one of those seats. So there's a lot going on to follow. Let me see what else. There's a reform panel. As you know, the Prime Minister promised before he left for Washington, D.C., he meted out the reprimands to 39 members of his own political party and said, I'm going to establish a reform panel. We're going to take care of this. It's an internal issue. I'm going to create the proposals for reforming the LDP so that we have a new era in Japanese politics. They just had a negotiation with their coalition party, Komeito, and Komeito came up with a list of 6 things that the LDP must do. And the LDP came to the meeting a little bit skinny. We'd like to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So there's no enthusiasm for them actually to be reforming themselves in order to escape this kind of hole that people always fall into, money and politics. They just go like 2 peas in a pod. They're both necessary, and they need to be a little bit more transparent than the LDP has allowed over the last couple of years, 20 years. Last couple of years. So the Komeito, their coalition party, is getting a little bit irritated with them. The opposition party is totally irritated with the LDP, saying there's no emphasis, there's no contrition. You're not even putting a good faith effort into reforming yourself. You're just kind of buying time and pushing things down the road. I think they will suffer for that in the by-election, and when we get together this time next week, the LDP could be really on the rope. So we're going to continue to watch that. You might remember also that as one of the reprimands that was meted out, the Prime Minister and the LDP decided that Shionoya, Shionoya, who is the Secretary General, he was kind of like the chairman of the Abe faction after Mr. Abe was assassinated. So there was a group of 4 or 5 or 6, and he was the kind of chief spokesman. And when Mr. Kishida authorized the reprimands, there were the highest reprimand is kick them out of the LDP. The second highest is we recommend that you resign from the LDP, and maybe you can come back again, but you need to resign voluntarily. One of the Diet members in the upper house did resign as a consequence of that immediately. Mr. Shionoya decided he's going to challenge that decision, and he wagged his finger at the cameras and at the Prime Minister. He said, "You criticize me for participating in this scam. What about you, Mr. Prime Minister? What about you, Mr. Motegi? Nobody said anything to you guys. And also, what about Mr. Hosoda? He wasn't even involved in the investigation because he was Speaker of the House and he was free from any kind of claim. And he was up to his neck in the scam. He was the leader of the Abe faction throughout 12 years of Abe's reign. So of course he should have been, and he got off scot-free. I mean, God rest his soul. But there's a lot of criticism, and Mr. Shionoya's finger was tired from wagging his finger. So this decision was last week. The panel decided that they're not going to accept his challenge, that the ruling stands that he should resign voluntarily. He's challenging that again, so now it's do or die. Probably the LDP will kick him out of the LDP. Ultimately, he will resign from the Diet and be held up as this is what you should avoid if you're a member of the LDP. So it's a sad story. He was a really seasoned politician, and I think he's gotten a lot of blame. I mean, he wasn't really the chairman. He was a group of 5, but everybody loves to jump on the Abe faction. And hopefully, like Mr. Motegi hopes, since there are no factions anymore, he's disbanded his, he can collect some of these lost souls and make himself prime minister and begin to rebuild the LDP. It doesn't look like rebuilding the LDP is in the interest of the current prime minister, so there's a lot to be said for a lot of different things there. Let me see what else we've got going on. There's a governor's election. You remember the governor in Shizuoka resigned for a lot of different reasons. The press usually says it's because he diminished the workers in that prefecture by having a speech to the newly entering new recruits. April 1st is opening day. They go to their first day of school. It's their first day to work in a company. And in a speech to the new employees of Shizuoka Prefecture, he said, "You guys are the brains. You guys are helping guide this prefecture and making things. You are the brains. You're not like the guys that raise pigs or farm the land. You guys are different." And that created a firestorm, maybe a false firestorm. This governor is no floozy. He's a very accomplished guy, PhD in philosophy in Boston, I believe. Governor, 4-time governor. He just didn't want to have that maglev tunnel going through his pristine prefecture. And I think the issue there was more about those kinds of politics and industrial development and the maglev going through his prefecture and underground in many aspects. He was concerned about the environmental impact. And now he's out, and there will be an election on May 26th for the new governor. The LDP's candidate and the Constitutional Democratic Party's candidate. So there are 2 candidates identified so far, and it's just kind of same-o, same-o. The LDP candidate is a bureaucrat from the Internal Affairs Division. So most of the governors, funny enough, in Japan come from the government. They come from internal affairs or maybe Ministry of Finance, and they're not seconded, but they're promoted as a candidate to run the prefecture. So the Japanese government really has a really strong hold. Not all of the governors, not all of the prefectures are guided by somebody who was a former bureaucrat, but it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like, once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine. And I think similarly, once you're a Japanese bureaucrat, you are full of pride and esteem for your country. You've devoted a lot to it. You were selected because you were a special cut above everybody else. You went to the University of Tokyo. You graduated from the law department. This circle of how to manage and guide the country is really dedicated to Nagata-cho and the central government. So having all of these governors, with the networks that they know through their experience is critically important. The CDP candidate, on the other hand, is a former, he's a former lower house member of the Constitutional Democratic Party. He was the mayor of one of the cities in the prefecture before he got into national politics, and so he is their candidate. It will be closely watched. If the LDP continues to suffer, then it really enhances the Constitutional Democratic Party. Should the Constitutional Democratic Party do extremely well in this by-election, then it also enhances the candidate there. Whether he says something ridiculous on the campaign trucks or not, I mean, just the dynamics and the atmospherics really support that. So the LDP could be in serious trouble, and depending on the prime minister's move of closing down the House, or maybe he just doesn't close down the House. But in any event, if there's going to be an election, the LDP is going to lose 20, 30, perhaps even 40 seats. So it's a very delicate thing. in light of all of this, like, could you stop already? The punishment is good enough. The yen hit a 34-year low this Wednesday, 154.79 dollars to the yen. And it closed out this weekend on Friday. It closed down, let me see, at 154.62. And if you recall, at this time in March, the yen was at 151 and kind of fluctuating back and forth. It's now it's scratching 155. This is unheard of, but it's going on, and it's going to continue to go on. And I predict that the yen is going to continue to be diminished without the Japanese Ministry of Finance or the Bank of Japan doing their intervention. They did that in 2022. You'll remember, a massive amount of money to prop up the yen. I think they're not going to do that this year. The Bank of Japan Governor Ueda was in Washington, D.C. There's a group of 20 meeting there this last week with the finance ministers, talking about currency fluctuations. It's not just Japan. South Korea, interestingly enough, is also suffering from that. They also brought some complaints to the body, and with Janet Yellen, who is the Secretary of the Treasury in the United States, they tried to squeeze out some concessions. And I think the outcome of that was intervention works when it's well coordinated and all parties are in alignment, and we don't have that alignment. So don't do your intervention, Mr. Ueda. Sit on your hands and wait for the water to find its own level. I think this is what they're going to do. And I think if the reality was that the yen goes, towards I believe it's going to breach 155 pretty soon, probably this week. It just might become too tenuous that intervention is required. And in order to get this consensus, concessions need to be made on other areas. And that's why it's so important to watch what the United States and South Korea and Japan and other nations are doing. There are concessions that are being granted. Japan is really in a position now where even despite Article 9 of the Constitution that says Japan will not produce offensive weapons, it will not possess offensive forces, it seems like that red line has already been crossed. It's being covered up with a lot of other different agreements. But I think we're moving in that direction, that ultimately Japan is going to have to face that and come up with a referendum to change Article 9 of the Constitution, because it's already being done with all of the things that are going on. And you might have your own opinion about that, but I think given the realities of North Korea, China, Taiwan, and all of the other things that are going on, it's just amazing the dynamics that are going geopolitically, that Japan really has to pony up. And I think that's one of the things that Joe Biden and Fumio Kishida talked about, this new era of the U.S.-Japan alliance. And it's not just the U.S.-Japan, it also includes Australia, the Brits, Italy, France. A lot of countries are now having this kind of lattice work of relationships with Japan, and it's very, very dedicated to a military presence. You might have missed the story where Japan and the United States agreed that the United States will locate a command and control center in Japan to manage all strategic forces in the Asia-Pacific region in the event of. The Japanese, in compliance with that, they had a meeting just this last week where they have assigned a new command and control. So the self-defense forces consist of the air, sea, and land forces, and they're not going to be combined, but there will be another general that will have the same rank, and he will be in charge of a command and control center that will be set up in Tokyo to accommodate the command and control center that is going to be set up by the United States. So this is big. This is really huge. That the government and the United States is moving in that direction, and it's just not that. I mean, it's also the advanced fighters that are being produced by Italy, Britain, and Japan, which will go on stream probably 12 years. So the budget has already agreed to pay for that. So this march towards it's not just defensive. Japan is also arguing for first strike capabilities, and that is very offensive in nature. So somebody's got to come up with that. The Diet also passed a very looked forward to child care law this last week, so that people who have children, they're encouraged to have children. They have child care support if they're when their child becomes 18. It used to be 16, now it's 18. They still get a cost of living allowance, and this robustness and the amount of money that's being dedicated to that is really enormous. So Japan is coming to terms with the fact that the population is declining. They need to do something about it. There are lots of ideas, but this is happening globally. It's not just a Japan issue. But the Japanese realize, we've tried it before. Let's import more foreigners. That didn't go so well. They said, let's give more power to women, shine on women, and that didn't go so well. So they're still trying. It's a difficult road to hoe. A recent report by the Prime Minister's office lamented the fact that nobody wants to join the government anymore. It used to be that government work was the prime attraction for graduates of universities. They wanted to work for the government. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. People who do that have seen their peers join private companies and have lunches served and really nice settings in their office environment, that sort of thing. If you've been in Japan and you've worked with the government and you've visited some of these ministerial offices, there's nothing plush about it. And if you saw a lunch tray that was being paid for by the government, I think you would probably fall over dead if you saw that. But in the private sector, it's a lot different, and it is attracting more of these graduates. And the Japanese government is at a real crossroads. They're going to pay this by enhancing the amount of payments for medical premiums that all Japanese pay. It's a national medical system here. They will be incurring a higher fee for that. That will kick in 2026, in 2 years, and it will go up almost to 880 yen per individual. And that's how they're going to pay for this. So people have more children. I don't know if it'll work, but somebody's going to be making a lot of book on that. In a related development, the Japanese government has also, the lower house has passed a bill. It's not law yet, but it is a bill to allow for joint custody in the event of divorce. So for those of you who are really seeped in what's going on in Japan culturally and legally, in the event of divorce, Japanese law doesn't allow for joint custody currently. One parent needs to take the child. And if there is any suggestion that there's been violence or intimidation practiced on one spouse against the other, it's kind of like the death knell. That person will not receive the kids. So there's frequently this claim of violence or intimidation practiced by one spouse, and that's why I had to escape with the kids. And it's just a terrible situation. It disproportionately affects foreigners who are married to Japanese when this sort of thing happens. So I think it's a lot of power and pressure came from foreigners who have also suffered from being caught in this kind of a situation. There's a seminar that's going on, Maya. I think it's in a week or so that focuses on this. I've been invited to be a speaker. When is that coming up?
It's on the 24th of May in the morning. So, but I'm not sure that it is actually an open door seminar. It will be broadcast online, so we can get the link and share it so that people get more information about the bill and so on.
Okay, thank you for that. So it is a big issue when you're married to a Japanese national and you're restricted from seeing your children. You are restricted. You can't see them until they reach the age of maturity. You can't have communications with them. Everything is dominated and directed by the remaining spouse. I mean, that is pretty dastardly. So there is a law that is being reviewed. It passed through the lower house. It's gone to the upper house. If the upper house agrees to it, then it will become a law, probably in this session. So it's something to look forward to. Unfortunately, with a lot of things in Japan, sometimes you wish that it was a little bit more robust, and it's not quite what you want. It's not quite the right temperature. It's not quite the right space. It's not the right price. Almost, but no cigar. And the same criticism has been lodged with the child care law, and it will probably be the same thing with the joint custody law, should it be passed. It's just they're trying to address an issue, and they they typically miss the mark. Noda Seiko, who was once prime candidate for prime minister, everybody remembers who she is. She was the LDP voted on the child care bill, and she is an LDP member, very prominent. She doesn't belong to a political faction. And she didn't follow the orders of the LDP to vote. So they vote in block. That's why the LDP is so strongly ensconced in political powers, because when you join the LDP, you promise that you're going to vote the way the party tells you to vote. She avoided that and voted with her conscience, and she said, I don't vote for this child care law. It's half baked. It's not fully cooked. It needs to have more stuff into it. I don't vote for it. And now she's in a little bit of hot water because she didn't toe the line. So hats off to her for voting with her conscience. Let's follow that and continue to keep on top of it. Like I said, the Minister of Defense will be in Hawaii over Golden Week. The permanent joint headquarters for the self-defense forces will be established. And yeah, interestingly enough, in this time of change, you change personnel who are part of the old field and you bring in the new blood. In line with this, the chief of the Indo-Pacific Command and Control Center, an admiral status career American, is giving up his seat. He had his last hurrah. He came to Tokyo to meet with his colleagues, and he'll be giving up that position to be succeeded by someone who is in charge of the Asia Pacific Command and Control now. So you're going to see a lot of changes going. I mean, even after the Biden Kishida trip, within days you're seeing tremendous action. You know, you're seeing with G20, you're seeing with the foreign ministers, with the Ministry of Defense. There is action that's going on. It's no longer wait a couple of days or wait a couple of weeks. There's a lot going on. And it's going to continue like that. There was a chip deal that the United States signed with Samsung. Once again, Samsung in South Korea the South Koreans are suffering from their currency weakness as well. And now this big deal signed by the United States to bring Samsung into the United States, into Texas. They're going to build a tremendous manufacturing plant, $6.4 billion worth of that. That's under the new 2022 Chips and Sciences Act passed by the Biden administration. So there's movement going on with that too. And there's also, the movement of TSMC in Kumamoto. They're going to launch their second plant also in Hokkaido. So there's a tremendous amount going on there, not just militarily, but also in chips and condensers, AI, cyber, and hypersonic. This agreement between the United States, Australia, Britain, and Japan to join Pillar 2 of the agreement, the military agreement that's there, is a big deal for Japan. Pillar 1 was to make sure that Australia has nuclear-powered submarine fleet. And Pillar 2, which Japan was invited to join in and they signed off on, involves underwater drones, AI, cyber security, and hypersonic missiles. So the technology and the prowess that Japan holds, plus their manufacturing abilities, is really giving this the opportunity for the Prime Minister to develop, I think this is the goal, a military industrial complex. As the United States example shows, even the Soviet Union, previously Russia, benefited from the military capabilities pumping out into the public sector new ideas, new technologies, new products. And Japan wants a piece of that. They're going to experiment with that too. Japan needs to pull themselves out of this 25-year-old doldrum that the economy has been in. And so they're looking for some new industry. It could be chips, it could be AI, but definitely I think the military-industrial complex is an idea that it seems to me the administration has embraced. Let me see. There is also a visit by the UN Security Council representative, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, visited Japan, a rare move by a senior ambassador within the Security Council. She visited South Korea, she visited Tokyo, and she's trying to give these people, the Koreans and the Japanese, confidence that the Security Council is invested in them. Japan and South Korea are not permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. They want to be. They are invitees. They have a position where they are invited. They've been invited for the last 10 years. But the United States wants to push those numbers up and make more permanent members of the UN Security Council. The sticking point here, well, not the sticking point, the reason why for this initiation and the emphasis on it is because there is an agreement to oversee North Korea's nuclear proliferation and missile programs by the UN. And that law comes up for, or that mandate comes up for review every couple of years. It came up for review in March. The Russians vetoed it and China abstained from it. And therefore, the agreement to oversee what's going on in North Korea by UN observers ceased. It ceased in March. And now the United States says, look, we don't know what they're doing there. We have no way of observing it. They could be violating more of the agreements that they've been in. They're supplying material to Ukraine. They're going to fly another spy satellite. They've launched one. They're going to launch another one probably this month. And the missile technology that they're developing in line with help from Russia, they're just really expanding their capabilities, and it's upsetting the whole region. And there is no oversight. If you're Russia or China, you're probably clapping your hands because it irritates the United States and scares the hell out of Japan. But it's the tension that is being felt here. And in light of that tension, the other kind of news report is the Coast Guard, the United States Coast Guard, the Japanese Coast Guard, the Philippine Coast Guard. So as you might remember, there was two parties had a state visit at the same time when Mr. Kishida was in Washington, D.C. It was his state visit, but it was also a state visit by Ferdinand Marcos from the Philippines. So it was the first time for these three leaders, the United States, Japan, and the Philippines, to get together, and they talked a lot about bolstering the Philippines' ability to counter Chinese incursions into their exclusive economic zone or even to disputed territories. It's come almost to fisticuffs, and the brunt of that is being carried on by the Coast Guard. One of the Coast Guard's vessels was donated by Japan, not the personnel, but in Vanuatu, a country in the South Pacific, far away from China, the United States has assigned Coast Guard cutters there, and Army Coast Guard personnel have stopped and boarded several Chinese fishing boats in that country. So that's got to cause some concern. It is when you board another company's boats, yes, it's a very dangerous situation. People can get hurt. The next likely scenario is the Coast Guard in the Philippines, under the support of the United States and Japan, having these same kinds of knockups with the Chinese. And if there is a boarding that is incurred there, I think you're going to see some really difficult interactions. Ferdinand Marcos said after meeting with the President of the United States, said, if there's one Filipino who is killed in the defense of our country, I'm going to call on the United States to execute our mutual defense, and let's go and get the guys who created that. So the kind of line in the sand is we're going to still continue to do this. We're going to defend ourselves from the water cannons and the rammings by the Chinese Coast Guards. But if one person is killed as a consequence of that, people have already been injured, obviously. then that's going to be the red line. So it's a real flashpoint. It was not discussed much as a flashpoint previously, but it looks like people are really starting to bone up and beef up their defenses. That's about it. I know it's a lot geopolitically, internally, and for Japanese politics, and also what's going on between the United States and Japan and the Philippines and South Korea. But these are the kind of issues we talk about. If we've gone over something that's a little bit too complicated, or you don't know the background, that's why we preserve the Q&A period. And so let's roll into that, Maya.
Okay. Okay, here we go. No, thank you. I was
Did I catch
on.
you off guard?
Sorry?
Did I catch you off guard?
Oh, yes, you did. Of
Yeah.
course. Yes,
Okay.
sure. Okay. Anyway, thank you very much, Timothy. And we have a lot of questions. Before we go into the questions, I would like to ask everybody who is watching us on YouTube or LinkedIn to give us a like or a comment, or if you are on YouTube, maybe subscribe, even though I know that nowadays this word doesn't hold very
Follow.
what
Please
follow.
follow.
Yes,
Yeah.
please follow us, yes, so that you can also be informed about when our next sessions are scheduled and so on. So thank you for doing that in advance. And Timothy, we've got really quite a few questions, so today I will start with one which was shared on us on YouTube from and that was the comment is from Hiroaki. So Hiroaki wrote, what will you expect the impact of US Congress approval of military assistance bills to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan will be? That's the impact of the approval of these. So I think that maybe Hiroaki means what will be the impact on Japanese politics, or probably the Japanese stance in this case, because we're talking about Japanese politics here. Timothy, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Hiroaki, you always have the most in-depth questions. Sometimes I catch them, sometimes I don't. This is another example of the time that I don't quite catch it. Israel is a big issue with the Japanese. There was a discussion this last week where the chief cabinet secretary, Mr. Hayashi, said that the United States should recognize the Palestinian state, and Japan is behind that issue within the UN Security Council. So there is a little bit of a distance between the United States and Japan on dealing with the Palestinians on the Gaza situation. I think if you know Japan, Japan is always going to be more on the humanitarian side, where the United States is always going to be on the power play side. I really don't know how that is actually going to shake out, but I think um, the tolerance for all of this controversy in Israel is coming to a head, and I hope you've seen the restraint by the Israelis just this last week. I hope that a little bit more calm settles in, but um, I'm not sure if I've got the question right, or if even my response has any adds any value to understanding it. But the United States is more supportive of Israel and I'm sorry, of the Palestinians than some people like. But they're also very friendly with Israel. Israel is a great friend of Japan. So there's a lot of difficulty in coming to terms with that.
Well, thank you for that. Okay. And then once again from Hiroaki. Hiroaki was very active in the beginning of this session. So once again on YouTube, this is about the LDP. So is there going to be a disintegration of the LDP? The answer is no. But there might be a reintegration of Grand Kochikai, or maybe
Yeah,
we'll see a Dai Kochikai
right.
in the future.
Yes. So when Mr. Motegi had his breakfast meeting with all of his members, and they decided to dissolve Heisei Kenkyukai as a faction, he didn't use the word disband. He just said we're going to give it a regrouping. It's a restart. It's not a disbanding. So even though this particular political faction has lost 6 heavyweights over the last 6 weeks or 2 months, which it qualifies as an exodus. I mean, 6 members, very prominent members of his faction, have left voluntarily. I think the play here is, although we're not factions anymore, we do have political groupings, and I'm going to help you during your election, and therefore you owe me the benefit of the favor. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. And as the Secretary General, you are in a position to cut lots of deals and do favors for a lot of people. So who knows how that's going to shake out? But yes, the LDP is changing. It's not going away. It's too powerful to be able to control and dominate Japanese politics and economy. They never want to give that up.
Right, and we have a comment along these lines from Chitrali on YouTube, and she says, Gigi did a report saying that the LDP factions have not dissolved in reality and that they are claiming long procedures for legal settlements. And the question is then, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
Are factions in fact invincible?
Yes. Who asked the question?
Chitrali, she joined us during the diet tour last year. Maybe you
Okay.
remember she was with the digital agency at the time and now is
Yeah.
back in the United States. Yes.
Great. Great question and very astute. Yes, I kind of agree with you. I mean, they have a good thing. The faction system worked for the LDP. It worked for people who were in the LDP. It diminished people who weren't in the LDP. It's never been a two-party state. The LDP has completely dominated, and even when they didn't, in a very, very brief period, um, people will say, look what happened. So of course we're going to vote for the LDP, even though we have no confidence in them, even though they stole the money and they lied to us and they're not going to reform. There's nobody that's better than them around. It's the same story that you hear when people talk about, we're going to change prime ministers. Oh, but he's the best. He's the one that's, there's nobody that compares to him. So it's a difficult um, cultural, I think, underpinning. But yeah, I kind of agree with you. They're not going to go away. It's the factions are anchored on the personality profile of the leader, and that's the way Japanese politics is. It's kind of the way many companies are run. It's either a family owned or a charismatic leader that runs it. It's not because of who owns the most number of shares always, but Japanese politics has that flavor of it too. So I kind of agree. It will continue, just in a different form.
Right, and we also know that Mr. Aso, he hasn't disbanded his faction at all and has absolutely no intention doing that, right? So they continue to meet weekly, they continue
Yep.
to discuss things. So yeah, we'll see
So,
what.
so with
Yeah.
Mr. Motegi, they've canceled their contract, their rental contract. They've turned off the lights. They've moved the desk. They're no
Mhm.
longer in the same physical location. But yes, like the earlier commenter, I don't think that that's really going to change Japanese politics. Just because you've changed an office and you're for political consumption, for public's consumption, you've dusted yourself off and you said I'm a different kind of person. Yeah, I think there needs to be a little bit more convincing going on there. The fact that the prime minister is dragging his feet on political reform is a pretty big signal, I think.
Yes. Okay, so thank you for the comments. Now we move to LinkedIn, and there on LinkedIn we have Hiroko-san's questions and comments as well. First of all, Hiroko-san, thank you very much for helping us with details and information that we just do not have the bandwidth to provide at during the live sessions. So thanks a lot for that and for supporting us in this way. And the question from Hiroko is, what is the purpose of Mr. Aso's trip to the US? Given his power within the LDP and the government, wouldn't his effort to meet with Mr. Trump indicate the Japanese government is expecting Mr. Trump's victory?
Okay, that's a great question. You have to keep your fingers in the pot, and you cannot discount the fact that Mr. Trump could possibly win. Um, so there's two things going on. The prime minister, it would be very undiplomatic and very unpolitic for him when he visited on a state visit to meet with Trump. There should be no publicity that Trump and Kishida, the current government of Japan, is meeting with Trump. That just would not be cool. But you can have your lieutenants, you can have other channels opened up. It is clever, it is the wise thing to do, because you just never know. You have to cover your bets. And probably, Mr. Aso and Mr. Kishida, they really don't get along very well. Mr. Kishida, his term in office as president of the LDP ends in about 5 months. Mr. Aso, he's towards he hasn't said he's not going to run in the next election, but he's getting on in age, and he could run, and I think if he wanted to, he could become prime minister. I don't think that's his call, but meeting with Trump and cutting deals and saying, look, if this situation happens, I will support you in your campaign. We will kind of talk about how old Mr. Biden is, and we'll make comments like that. And then if you become prime minister, then this is how things are going to work out. You're not going to wag your finger at us and tell us to pay our fair share for the defense of the islands because the United States has, nuclear power and bases in Okinawa. We're not going to have that conversation. We're going to be able to sell more cars in the United States. There's, deals will be cut like that. Whether they come to fruition or not depends on, how the election goes. But you're going to see more and more of this. The Biden campaign is hell-bent on getting Joe Biden elected. So you see all of these smear articles and these great articles about Biden compared to Mr. Trump, and just a lot of stuff going on. It's a funny time in not just U.S. politics, but also in Japan as well. Mr. Aso, I think he's sick of Mr. Kishida being prime minister, and he wishes somebody else was there. And it's probably within his power to dictate who that's going to be. Although Kono Taro is in his political faction, it's unlikely that he would bless Kono Taro. He's probably got somebody else in mind, but we're not going to know that until later on. Mr. Motegi is certainly going to be there. Noda Seiko, the person who said it was just unbaked, the bill for child care law, it just wasn't cooked enough. She's definitely going to be a candidate. So it's going to be an open field, but it's just not time right now. I think the thing to watch right now is the by-election. The campaign ends next Saturday, and the election is on Sunday. And then what kind of conundrum that puts the prime minister in, and also what Mr. Motegi decides. I think going forward, sorry to go on too much, Maya, but I think the issue that's going to be coming up is what Mr. Motegi does after the by-election, what his game plan is. I think you'll see him rise in prominence. You'll see a lot of stories about that.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting period of time. Well, if Mr. Kishida does not call a general election, right? A snap election before or soon after that by-election. Okay, and then there is a comment actually about the question from Cam, and Cam says they would most likely meet in September during the UN meeting. That's, I believe, Mr. Aso, maybe? Or is it Cam? Are you talking about Aso or Kishida and Trump? I'm not sure about that, but okay. So, and then it's traditional to have world leaders meet candidates when the world gathers in the UN in September. And then there is a question from Ferran. Ferran, thank you very much for the question. Okay, thank you, Cam. That was correct. Okay. And then why does Aso Taro not want to endorse Kono Taro?
Oh, okay. So you've got several things going on there, Maya. I think I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to address the Kono Taro issue, but if Cam had a question that I haven't
No,
addressed.
Cam didn't have a question. He had a comment, and so I read through them. Actually, through
Okay.
the two comments. Thank you, Cam. Yes, and
Okay.
yes.
And I think what Cam's suggestion is that
Mm-hmm.
sure, Mr. Kishida is going to meet with Trump.
Yes.
There's an opportunity to do that.
Yes.
All these world leaders do that when the
Mm-hmm.
UN gets together. I think it's appropriate. I just don't think during a state visit it's just not going to happen. But also, you need to develop these channels. Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Aso is the number one or number two most powerful politician in Japan, and to have an appeal and try and meet with Trump. He wasn't successful the first time. So that kind of tells you something. That tells you, where Mr. Trump places Japan or the Japan leadership. But I think Mr. Aso will be successful this time. But of course, we're not going to know the details of that because it's a very delicate discussion to have. But I think it's important, and I think I think other people, not just Taro Aso and the Japanese government, but I think everybody else needs to be prepared for the eventuality that Donald Trump very likely could become president of the United States. And I know I'm going to lose some listeners as a consequence of that, but that's my sense of it.
Right. Well, based on what is happening currently, I don't think that saying that is basically, taking sides or whatever. That's how things look at this point of time, and we don't take sides in these episodes. So, thankfully. Right. Okay, Timothy, moving on. So, once again, I'll read the question of Ferran. Ferran, thank you very much for that question. And the question is, why does Taro not want to endorse Taro?
Okay, it's a little bit more complicated. Taro Aso and Taro, there's a lot of history there. Taro's dad was a great politician. He was Speaker of the House. He was president of he's the only person who became president of the LDP who did not become prime minister. That's Taro's dad. So dad is still alive, still very active, kind of in the background. He doesn't have his lapel badge anymore. But, he missed that opportunity, and he would sure like his son to succeed him and be prime minister. I personally believe that Taro will be prime minister at some point in time. I just don't know when. But since Mr. Aso is the head of the faction, yeah, I think maybe he just dislikes Taro for not kowtowing enough, not being as respectful as he thought he should be. It's kind of complicated. Maybe he's just a young upstart and he needs to be put in his place and kept in his place. I think that there's that kind of dynamic going on. Also, having Taro become president of the LDP and thus prime minister would diminish, you would think, or maybe only Mr. Aso thinks, that it would diminish his brand or his ability to control things. I don't know, but it's a complicated question. I think, once again, eventually he will become prime minister. Maybe we have to wait for Mr. Aso to move on and to resign from politics and to watch things from the back seat. Hard to tell, but a great question.
Yes, okay. Hard to tell indeed. Okay, so, and there is something that I have. Okay, so that I have been wondering about recently. We know that, well, I'm talking about the by-elections, and we know that in the 3 seats for these by-elections that are going to take place on April the 28th, the CDP, the Constitutional Democratic Party, has candidates, right? And then we also know that the LDP is not running any candidates in 2 of them, only in Shimane. But my question basically is more about Ishin. So so the thing is that it seems that Ishin and the Constitutional Party of Japan are actually fighting against each other, trying to get each other's candidates or each other electorates, let's say, and to win over those people who are voting for the other party. And it still seems that they're not really focused on getting some of, or winning over some of the electorate of the LDP. So what is going on there? It's such a strange development. My question is also, it continues, and I know that you don't have bad with it. I know. But the question is, so is Ishin really focused only on Osaka? Or are they trying to focus on Osaka first and expand gradually from there? Is it a long-term policy? it's just such a strange development at the moment because, okay, I'm stopping here.
You driving me crazy, Maya.
Oh,
So
apologies. Yeah,
that's
okay.
okay. And also I have to, maybe you can tell from the background it's starting to drizzle, and
Oh,
I'm
okay.
I'm I'm eager to
You're
push
going
off.
to melt. You're going to melt
I'm
soon.
going to melt. But
Hmm.
about So the fight is between Ishin and the Constitutional Democratic Party. The opposition party is the Constitutional Democratic Party. They're larger than Ishin. Ishin wants to eclipse them and be the opposition party. Here we go. Wants to be the opposition party. It's okay, Evan. It's just kind of getting in the way of the camera. So I'm being protected from the rain. Um, yes, Mr. Baba, who is the leader of Ishin, actually went on the offensive against the Constitutional Democratic Party just this week in a campaign speech, going after them and telling. I think that's maybe what you're referring to. That it's a real fight. It's not so much the LDP come to us, but if you're an LDP member and you don't have a candidate to vote for, you're tied blue LDP, you've got two candidates. It's instructive, as the polls will show, at who voted for who has the better story, who has the better kind of charisma as a political leader. It will be decided in Nagasaki and in Tokyo, particularly in Tokyo. The candidate that the LDP, I'm sorry, that the Constitutional Democratic Party has endorsed in Tokyo is, I mean, they've got 8 candidates there. And so who wins in Tokyo, who wins in Nagasaki, and potentially who wins in Shimane? Yes, you've got great bragging rights, and the people are telling you that your policies are more akin to the LDP than being in the opposition. So you have more of an opportunity to play that up in the next election. So it's very instructive for the pollsters to determine, who is, who's got if you're not going to vote for the LDP and people are fleeing the LDP, 98% of the people, when they polled them, don't vote for any political party. Even for the LDP, it's like 16 or 17% are dedicated or would vote for the LDP. It's the largest block, or the unassigned block. They don't they'd vote for probably the personality or some sort of a personal relationship, or they know somebody in the organization and that's why they vote, not so much on political grounds, but sometimes political grounds dictate it. But if you're not going to vote for the LDP, the next closest is not Komeito. The next closest is the Constitutional Democratic Party, or Ishin. And Ishin they have a strategy, a 3-step strategy. They focus on Osaka. They succeeded there. They got all of the seats, the governor's seat, the mayor's seat. They got the majority in the prefectural assembly. They're going great gangbusters in Osaka. They kicked out a bunch of LDP members. They've gone into contiguous prefectures too and done well there. They got a governor's seat. They've got seats throughout Japan, but they're not quite national yet, but that's where they want to be. It takes money and funding and people dedicating their time to it. So Ishin is the upstart. They're the youngest, and they want to dominate by being the opposition party and then to kick out the LDP. So if you're following it, it's a pretty easily understood policy platform for Ishin, but it's their main target is, we want to be what the Constitutional Democratic Party is now, the main contender and the main negotiator with the LDP on issues of importance.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that. And we have a couple of more questions. So you're still there. Okay, not
I'm here.
disappearing in the rain. So, by the way, many thanks to Evan for trying to keep the computer and to keep you out of the rain. So, even though maybe Evan is not hearing me. Well, okay. So, going now to LinkedIn once again, we have, a comment from Rumiko there. So, regarding the Japan US dollar, the rate, the yen rate, So the Japanese yen has depreciated drastically during the past couple of months. Do you have any information about the Japanese Ministry of Finance trying to print and issue the new Japanese yen bills? This seems to be going out, well, the new Japanese yen bills seem to be going out to the market in July 2024.
Mhm.
So, have you heard about this and what are your comments on this?
I have heard about that. Just a couple of stories, not enough for me to make it a topic of concern on this briefing, but given Rumiko's question, maybe I should focus on it next week. But they are issuing new bills. These bills need to be read by the scanners. Not all of them are. I understood there were some problems with that. They've come out with a 5,000 yen note and some issue about who is on the face of the bill. But I haven't looked at it in too much depth. But I know that it's coming up. But Rumiko, if it's of keen interest to you, and yeah, new bills coming out to help for counterfeiting and also to move more gradually towards a digital currency that Japan is moving very rapidly towards.
Right. Okay. So maybe we'll continue on the topic about this topic later on in other sessions. There is one more comment. Maybe it is also a question from Romiko on LinkedIn, and it is about the joint custody. So
Yes.
I gather that her question is about well, basically, the new legislation will be applied to cases of divorced parents or parents that divorce from now on. But how does it apply, this joint custody? Does it apply also to parents who were divorced before the law went into?
Okay. Under normal circumstances, it doesn't apply until the law goes into effect.
Mhm.
This law will go into effect in 2026. But there are stipulations to allow the family court and the child care services to apply certain concepts that are contained in the future law to be applied today. Um, if there is an acknowledgement of both parties, so they can't force it, it can't be unilaterally enforced by the state, but these concepts can be accepted by the contesting parties. And you've got to imagine that if it doesn't benefit you, you're not going to agree to it. So still the fight continues. And even under the current law that has been passed by the lower house, it's been pushed up to the upper house for their consideration. Even then, it really doesn't have the kind of teeth that if you are victimized by the cultural underpinnings of this situation where custody is only granted to one parent, and you're the parent that doesn't get to see your kids, it is woefully inadequate. And the person who is aggrieved, they can say, there's been violence, there's been intimidation, I fear for my life, and that's why the children need to stay with me. And it's just a really bad historical issue, part of Japanese law, part of the culture that just really has very many negative effects. And I think the Japanese are coming to terms with that. I don't think the first iteration of this bill will be the final one, but it is a step in the right direction. And I just wish that there was better help and better relief for people who are suffering from that.
Okay, thank you for that. And Rumiko, I hope that this answered your questions and the comments as well. Going back to Clubhouse now with Ryan Bangia, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. So the question there is, realistically speaking, what kind of action reorientation would be the worst for Mr. Kishida's prospects and what would benefit him the most?
Um, I think the worst situation would be vote with your conscience. You're not obliged to vote because you belong to a political grouping or because somebody's done favors for you. With regard to voting for the president of the LDP, you have complete freedom. It's a secret vote. Anybody can vote. Vote with your conscience. That would probably be. There are some people who would benefit wildly as a consequence of that because of popularity. But please remember, the vote for the LDP president. It's not a general election. It's the LDP. The members of the LDP. First of all, members of the LDP who are diet members, they get a certain percentage of votes. And members of the LDP who are not diet members, they've just been members of the LDP, they get a certain percentage of votes. And they vote for who they want the president to be. That president, since he's gotten the most votes from the LDP, presumably, which holds, presumably, more than 50% of the diet seats, then the diet seats vote for the prime minister because it's a parliamentary democracy. The prime minister is selected by the members of the parliament. And so that's how that works. But a good question. I think for the prime minister, he would like, the prime minister is unchallenged and he gets to stay prime minister as long as he wants to be, is the rule that he wants to follow. And as prime minister, nobody else can contest him, especially if they're powerful. They have a membership. They have either a cabinet portfolio or a membership in a high-ranking LDP position. They are politically restricted from actually criticizing the prime minister. So you keep everybody at bay. I hope that's
Yes. Well, I hope so too. Well, great, and thank you for the answer, Timothy. And of course, with such a what's that dynamics in the LDP, it's very difficult to say what is good. And sometimes when things good look bad, they are actually good, and the other way around. So
right. And not only that, but if you read the newspaper, you don't get the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
It's like reading Bunshun. Bunshun gives you some of the story, it gives you some of the insight, but they have bones to pick too. So you really need to be astute and follow the news that is of interest to you, and also
Mm-hmm.
listen to programs like this. I mean, we are unaffiliated with any of the news sources, or we're not paid by anybody to say certain things. So you just need to spread your wings a little bit and collect the information so you can make your own informed decisions.
Indeed. Well, Timothy, I have some good news for you. Yes, that we have gone through all the questions and answers, and it means that, you can enjoy the sunshine. I can see that it's probably kind of raining and sunny at the
It's
same time on your end.
It stopped raining, and we are in a shallow inlet. So I think throughout the broadcast, the
Mm-hmm.
boat has been shifting because the tide has been shifting. So actually, you've gotten a panoramic view of the entire harbor that we've been in. It's been, and the
Yeah,
weather's held out just recently. But now the
great.
sun's coming out. We're going to set sail, and I'm
Mhm.
really delighted to have had this opportunity. And I'm also really delighted that it's over so that I can set sail.
Well, I'm sure you're delighted that it is over until next 8:20, no, 8:10 actually, when you start complaining again. So I'll brace myself until then
Guaranteed.
for that.
Guaranteed.
Okay, yes.
So thank you,
Well,
everybody. Thanks for listening in.
indeed, thank you everybody once again for listening in, for staying with us, for the questions and answers. As Timothy says, we always have great questions, great comments as well. So this is wonderful. And also, because of you, we are here actually. So thanks a lot for that, for keeping us in check
Yeah.
and online as well. So these episodes, they remain online, they remain on LinkedIn, they remain on Facebook, and also on YouTube, in Clubhouse as well. So if you have missed parts of them, you can always go back and re-listen. We also put the timestamps pretty soon after we finish this, especially on YouTube. So thanks a lot again, and we'll be here at
And the
8.
synopsis.
And yes, what is that?
And the synopsis.
The synopsis as well. Yes, it's going out every week. Timothy is putting his heart into it, and it's pumped. Yes, on LinkedIn. We also send it out through the newsletter of Langley Squire. So if you haven't subscribed yet to the newsletter, please do so. You can do so on LinkedIn. We have links there. Or if you are wondering where you can find the link, just DM. Message us and we'll give you the link for subscription. That's
It's
all for
so
today.
expensive.
It is, yes. You cannot. I mean, for Timothy, it is because it takes him, a couple of hours to put together. But for everybody else, it's actually open and available free of charge. So, Timothy, once again, your effort is
Thank you.
appreciated very much. Great. Okay, that's all for today. See you on
Yay!
week. Also, remember that Tim Sullivan and I, we have a podcast on Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock. So join us. We'll be talking about cultural issues, business issues, and so on about Japan and also how it compares to other parts of the world. That's all for today. Have a great day.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Timothy. Yes.
Woohoo!
Woohoo.
168.
Yeah, 168 next time. Can you believe this? Kind of